So we're going to be making quite a few changes to our famous quote page. We are going to incorporate web fonts. That is why I had you download Caviar Dreams. We are going to be working with some of the newer background commands. We are also going to be implementing a gradient, and you are going to learn how to do custom tooltips. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I am going to open Famous Quote for editing. So just right-clicking, I'm just going to open with VS Code. And I'm going to go ahead and maximize this window. And you can kind of take a look to see what I have in here so far. Everything that's in here at this point is CSS that you are familiar with. Just at a glance, you can see that I've inserted the background image, that we have a flexbox display, and it should be horizontal boxes, and we're allowing them to wrap if needed. And I've got some dimensions set up for the children, or the child elements. And we've got a little formatting for our H1. And we have a quote box with some formatting as well. And you will notice that body and H1 are HTML selectors, and then we have several classes. So we have a parent class, a child class, and a quote box class. And just taking a look down here in our HTML, we can see that we made section the parent, and for the different divisions, we have made those children. And we've also applied the quote box class. So we've got two classes applied to the different divisions. So let's take a look at this in a browser. Let me pull this over. So this is basically what it looks like now. And it will look pretty different, quite a bit different by the time we're done. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and start by adding some of the code. So we're going to set up these custom tooltips. So basically the idea behind this is when we point and pause, we want the actual philosopher or the person who made the quote to display. So that makes it kind of like a game. So what we're going to be doing is creating a little custom tooltip that will do this for us. And you can apply custom tips to anything. Okay? We're going to be applying them to a paragraph, but you can apply them to an anchor or really any HTML selector. So we are just choosing to apply them to paragraphs. So we have our paragraph selector dot tip because we want the tooltip associated with paragraphs. And we'll say position relative, which means that the tip will display relative to the paragraph, okay, in the same vicinity as the paragraph. And we want our tip to be at the top or on top of any other content. So we're going to set the Z index for this to be 100. So we're picking a large number to ensure that the tip displays, that it's not hidden under the box or under a graphic. Okay, so that's the tip. Now, how you create these tips is you have to add span tags in your HTML, and between the opening and closing span, any text that you enter becomes the tip that displays. So we need to say, for the paragraphs that have the tips, in the span tags, when our page initially loads, we do not want the tip to display, right? When we load the page, we don't want to see all these tip boxes. We only want to see them if we point the mouse at the paragraph. Okay, so the default state for these tips is going to be not displayed. Now, when do we want to see them? We want to see them when we point the mouse at the paragraph, and that is the hover state. So for these tips that are associated with our paragraphs, when we hover, that is when we want to see the tip. So we're saying p.tip : hover. So when we're pointing at those paragraphs that have a class of tip, and when we're pointing at them or hovering, then we do want to see what's inside the span tag. Okay, and so we're going to say display block, very first thing. So before, what was in the span tag was hidden. Now it is going to be displayed. And we will set the position to be absolute. And now this top and left setting, I've kind of figured out how to get these tips to be pretty much in the top center of the quote box. And this was a trial and error thing. So we want the top set to -30 px and left to be 10 px. So what I did was kind of play around with the top and left settings to figure out where I wanted the box to display. Because by default, the box displayed on top of the quote text, and I wanted it a little above the quote text. And that's why I did a -30. So basically moved the box up 30 pixels. And then initially the box was on the very left of the quote, and I wanted it in a little bit from the left, which is why I chose 10. Now for the tip box itself, we're going to make the width of this box 200. If the philosopher's name is larger than the width, the text will just wrap. And we're going to set some padding so that the philosopher's name isn't right up against the edge of this box that we're creating. And we're going to do a little border on this. Okay, so it'll just have like a little thin black line around it. And we're going to put a gradient in the background because that'll make it stand out a little bit. Just going to do the default linear, which goes from top to bottom. And we're going to use two colors, peach puff, which is one of my favorites, and white. Okay, so it's just going to kind of go from peach to white. Going to have a little black border around it. It's going to be about 200 pixels in width. And we positioned it so it's going to be near the top of our quote container. And now we need to tell it that the color of the text that displays in our tip box should be black, and that we want the text to be center aligned. Okay, so at this point, we pretty much have all of the CSS that we need for the tip. So we're associating a tip class with the paragraphs. We are basically saying that the initial state of span is going to be not to display it, but when they hover over span, that is when we're going to display whatever is between the opening and closing span tags. And not only are we going to display it, but we're going to format it as well. So basically our next task is to insert these span tags. And so what we're going to do is put them before the closing paragraph. So we're just going to key in span and end span here. And then between the opening and closing, that is where I'm going to put the name of the philosopher. And because I'm a lazy typist, I am going to copy, and we'll paste this right before the closing P. And then I'm just going to change Gretzky here. And we'll paste before this closing. And we'll change our philosopher. And before this one, change this philosopher. And finally, this last one. Okay, and at this point, we are going to save. And let's see, we're going to refresh this. Hopefully. Okay, and if you point and pause, should notice that we can see now the tip. You might be thinking, well, I don't like that left set at 10 because that looks funny. We are going to be formatting these boxes a little bit more. It'll look fine when we're all done. So just hold on. When we're all done, it will look a little bit more centered, but this is what we've done so far. So all of that tooltip code produced this end result. So our next little step here is going to be to add the web font. And to do that, now I always put this at the top of the style just so that if any of the selectors use it, it knows about the font first. So to use a font that is on your system that you are not sure if your end user will have it or not, you can use @FontFace. And then you need to basically provide two things. Okay, so we have to tell it a name for our font, and we can just make this up. So I'm going to call it Caviar. Okay, and then we have to tell it the address of the font we are using. So when you transfer it to the internet, this should be the address that you're going to have it online. And so we're putting ours in the fonts folder, and the name is caviardreams.ttf for true type font. And it is easiest if you use all lowercase when you name your fonts and that you don't include spaces. It just makes it a little bit easier. So now that we have told it where to look for this custom font, and we've told it the name that we're going to use to refer to that font, then we can go through and add some code to use it. So we're going to add the font family code, and we're using our font, Caviar. And if they don't have that, we're just going to use a generic script font. And we're going to do that in H1 as well. So let's save this. And we're going to take a look. And you should notice that the font is going to look different once we reload. And it actually looks quite a bit different. Now, our next little task, we are going to actually put a little background image in our quote boxes. It's a little goldfish that's going to swim. And we're also going to round our boxes so they have rounded ends. And we're going to do a box shadow. We'll have a little black shadow around them. So we need to modify our quote box class. I'm going to add some code to that. So first we're going to add the code that will create those rounded corners. And then we'll add our little fishy here. We got border radius of 30, which is going to create a pretty rounded corner. We got the box shadow. And we're setting vertical and horizontal to 2 pixels. And black, we are not setting any kind of a blur. And we're setting our background clip to border box. So what background clip specifies is the area where we want the background color to be filled in relation to the border, padding, and content areas. Border box is the default. It takes the color, puts it to the edge of the border. Okay, other values that we could have used would be padding box, where the background color goes to the edge of the padding, or content box, where the background color is only in the content area, not in the padding. But we're choosing border box. So I'm going to save this and then we're going to take a look. Because just adding that, in my opinion, really enhances the way our page is going to look. Okay, so you can kind of see that little shadow, and you also can see how the rounded edges look. So our next little task is going to be to put the little fishy in here. To add our little fish, we do need to download it. I'm pulling this over here. This is a PNG file, and it has a transparent background. And because we're going to be putting this in the quote box, and we still want the peach puff color to show through, this type of image works really well. So we're going to go ahead and save this into our media folder. And then this is the code that we are going to use to add the fish. So in our little quote box here, I'm going to go ahead and add background URL. Single quotes, we've got media, goldfish, PNG. And we want the position on this to be in the bottom left corner. So we're going to say left bottom. And this new feature lets us make the fish smaller because the fish image is too big. And what we want is a very small fishy. So we want him to be about 50 pixels wide and 50 pixels tall. So this is actually an awesome feature that is new that lets you actually resize the image. Prior to this, you had to go into a web editing program and resize the image there. And now you can just do it like this, which is actually pretty awesome. And background origin specifies where this image should reside in respect to, do you want it to go to the edge of the padding? Do you want it to be in the content area? Or do you want it to go to the edge of the border? And so what we want this fish to do is go to the edge of the padding. And we don't really want it to go into the border because the border would then overlap with the fish. And so having the fish go into the padding looks pretty good. That's what we want. And we do not want a bunch of little fishies along the bottom of our quote. We only want one. So we're going to set background repeat to no repeat. That way we only have one little fishy. So we're going to save this. And we will reload our page. We pull it over here and reload. Okay, so you can see a little fishy here. And at 50 pixels, he looks pretty good. Okay, and because we have him to the edge of the padding, that is why he's kind of right on the edge of our box. Now, what we're going to be doing with this is adding some animation to it. So we're going to keep it open. And as far as our tip goes, we probably could move that over just a tad. So let's go back into here. And this would be our span area. Let's change left to 5. And then we will go ahead and reload. Not noticing a whole lot of difference on that. So we'll just pretty much leave it alone. I mean, we could take left out. Let's see what happens when we take left out. Let me save. And let's reload. And it's over a little bit, not a whole lot. But I think that does look better. So if you would like to remove the left, go ahead. I'll leave it up to you.